Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Nishant, and welcome to another episode of the Nishant Garg Show. The mission of this show is to spread awareness on mindfulness practices, psychology, mental health, psychotherapy, and spirituality. My job on this show is to invite world-class performers to share the practices to live a fulfilled life. This episode guest is Dr. Kimble Greene. Dr. Kimble Greene, Ph.D., is a best-selling author, master catalyst, and trailblazer. As the founder and chief catalyst of Catalyst Enterprises Worldwide LLC, she serves people across the globe seeking healing, support, and guidance as they evolve from struggle to success. With a PhD in psychology, Kimble has over 35 years of success as an agency executive, professional consultant, entrepreneur, and personal coach catalyst. She is also an intuitive with several certifications in energy medicine and alternative healing. In 2010, Kimble translated the philosophies and strategies she had been using successfully for years into 4 books. Those philosophies, now known as the Catalyst Factor, are the foundation for the Monarch Method, the acclaimed 3-step approach for personal transformation used internationally. She is a believer in the power of connection and promotes collaboration and building community as a pathway to personal and professional success. Now let the episode begin. Dr. Kimble, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being here, Nishant.
What did you have in the breakfast? It's so early in Portland.
It is it's not that early. 9 o'clock isn't too early. We usually get up at 5 because the dogs wake us up.
So how many dogs do you have?
We have 3 dogs.
Okay. Let's talk about that. How does your family describe what you do for a living?
Well, it's described in a number of different ways. And I would start by saying my focus is on research and method development with regard to transformation and being able to move forward in our lives. And I've shifted from working with groups to consulting to leadership to individuals. I think it really depends on what's going on in the world at the time.
And you talk about method development, right? So what is it about?
Well, years ago when I had a private practice, there was a theme running through the concerns that my clients had. And so many of them expressed frustration with being dependent on the system or dependent on medications and just not being able to move forward in their lives in a way that they wanted to. So I thought there's got to be things that people can do at home on their own, independent of, coming to see someone 1 hour a week. So I began to think about what sort of steps I could develop so that people could continue the work we were doing in our sessions on their own. And one thing turned into another, and I ended up creating a couple different methods that are self-guided that are now in my books that were published in 2015. And it allows people to identify what's blocking them and shift that or move that out of the way so that they can move forward and solve problems and achieve their goals.
And you were saying those are self-guided methods.
Correct. So that once they learn the method, then you can, in particular, I'm referring to my Monarch Method. Once you learn the method, you can reapply the 3-step formula to goals or struggles for the rest of your life.
Could you walk us through those 3 steps that our listeners can implement on their own?
Sure. So basically my approach is based on the abundance of research out there, including my own, that underscores we are primarily beings of energy and belief rather than simply bodies of matter and cognition. And what that means is that we have much more influence over shifting thoughts and feelings than was ever previously believed, that we really can create changes physically, mentally, and emotionally in a profound way. So I created 3 steps to help people get drilled down to the first step, what is their primary goal? And what is their primary concern? And it's usually not what people think of as the obvious struggle. Your primary goal usually has layers, and there's things beneath what seems obvious. So let's say someone has a problem with being late, and they want to solve that. That's probably not their primary goal. It just seems to be what they're focused on at the time. So the first step is helping them really drill down to what is your biggest struggle and or goal. And then the second step is tapping into your beliefs that keep you stuck. And many of our beliefs are subconscious. So one of the interesting facts that I discovered along the way in my research is that 95% of who we are is subconscious, which only leaves a mere 5% of conscious activity. So as you can imagine, it's like an iceberg. Most of what goes on in our daily lives is subconscious. And that is the mechanism that drives most of our thoughts and feelings and behaviors. So the second step helps people dive into what is the subconscious belief that's keeping them stuck at this point in their lives. And then the third step is shifting that belief and replacing it with a new one that supports who they are today and what their goals are moving forward.
And in fact, Dr. Joe Dispenza talks about that. Over 95% of our beliefs are subconscious, and by the time we hit the age 35, we run on autopilot. 95% of our actions are driven from the past.
Yes, he does. And I admire him very much. I love his work. And Dr. Bruce Lipton is another respected researcher in the field. And there's quite a few out there that have really looked into, what is the old science that's perpetuating this message that we have to rely on our DNA and the experts and the medical system in order to heal and move forward. And that's really old news, if you will. And researchers such as Joe Dispenza and myself have really been looking into there's got to be more to who we are and more to our personal power than just relying on DNA. So it's been a fascinating journey, and it's a great field to look into, and some amazing discoveries about how our neuropathologies work much more powerfully, in fact, than our genes. So there's a lot of research and a lot of cool discovery going on in this field. One of the names that people often refer to is epigenetics, which is the study of how we function beyond our gene structure.
This is a very interesting topic to me, talking about the struggle, beliefs, how we shape our beliefs, epigenetics, and how we overcome our negative beliefs which are not serving us. So I would like to ask you that somebody needs awareness to really work on their struggle or any obstacles in their life. How can somebody be aware that whatever they are doing is not working, is not serving in their lives?
Well, I think most of us know that. Whenever we have a thought, a feeling, a behavior that doesn't sit well with us, or if there's a goal we've been trying to achieve that we're just swirling around and have been swirling around that same struggle for years. And sometimes it's just a sense of there's got to be more to my life than this. I know I'm meant to do something different. I know I'm meant to live differently and experience life differently and serve differently. So I think even though we may not be able to drill down to the specifics, everybody has a sense of discontent or not. And it's about deciding to reach out and get information and support with being able to transform that feeling of discontent or unfulfillment.
Do you feel that listening to our intuition may help in going towards transformational space?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, I have written quite a bit on the power of intuition. Intuition is our sixth sense. And my belief is that it's our most powerful sense, that our intuitive senses are actually wisdom on a very grand scale. And indeed, our intuitive intelligence is much smarter, if you will, than our brain intelligence. So intuition plays a huge part in helping us clarify the pathway moving forward, in helping making decisions, and just understanding what's to come and what our options are. So intuition is very powerful and very important, a very important skill to work with and expand.
As a listener, I have so many voices in my head, including fears, intuition, ego voice, my past conditioning. How should I know which one is coming from my intuition?
That's a good question. I think intuition is like any other sense. It requires attention and focus to expand that sensory capacity. So for an example, if you go into a department store, which these days we don't do very often, but when you go into a department store and let's say you're going to buy perfume for somebody, and you get to the perfume department, your nose, that sensory capacity for smell has not been sensitized the way it would be for the person behind the counter. So you hear about these perfumists, I don't even know if that's what you call them, but the people that study and create the perfumes, and even people in the fields such as creating wines and things like that, their sensory capacities have been so focused and sensitized that they can discern things that the normal person cannot. So we all have that ability. It's just a matter of carefully working with that sensory capacity and expanding it as much as you can.
Do you think our old beliefs cover our intuition, the power of our intuition listening?
I think our outdated beliefs are very powerful. So what happens let's just use a childhood example. Most of our subconscious beliefs are established when we're children. And we establish beliefs in order to cope with and optimize our circumstances, whatever they may be. And so those beliefs serve us. They become subconscious, and sometimes they're even formed subconsciously. And they serve us for surviving and thriving in our environments. Once we leave that environment, so a child eventually becomes an adult and they move out of their family home and they're living their own independent life, what's happening is those subconscious beliefs are still running in the background like tapes. And because 95% of who we are is subconscious, those tapes are very, very loud and very, very influential. So that when we, as adults, decide, I want to do something different. I don't need the same survival mechanisms that I did when I was a child. I need new ones. Consciously, they try to change their thoughts, feelings, and behaviors so that they can move forward. But what's happening is they're running up against those subconscious core beliefs. So because 10 to 5% of who we are is conscious and the rest is subconscious, the subconscious is always going to undermine what the conscious is doing. So a lot of people use positive psychology and affirmations and changing thoughts and emotions to move forward. And those are great mechanisms to move forward. The key is that they have to align with your subconscious core beliefs. Otherwise, your subconscious will always undermine you. So the key for deep, sustainable change is to reveal the subconscious core belief that's outdated and realign it with your current conscious goals and efforts moving forward.
This is so powerful. What you're saying is subconscious is serving like a filter. Even if we affirm, I am good, I am amazing, I'm awesome, that is being filtered through our subconscious mind, and it doesn't even go into the bottom of subconscious if we are not working to, you know, to refurbish our or revamp our subconscious mind.
Right, because the subconscious mind it's sort of like an elephant and a mouse. The subconscious mind is so huge that unless those two things are working together, the larger one is always going to undermine the smaller one.
And the voice of intuition is undermined by the big elephant called subconscious mind. It is like if you are listening to rock music and the music is loud, if you want to really focus on the beats of drum or the acoustic guitar, we get to really focus and be attentive into that instrument. And it requires a lot of focus and attention.
Yes, and it requires filtering all of the other noise out of the way so that you can really understand what that one instrument is doing, the music that it is playing for you.
Right now, I have a book called Psycho-Cybernetics on my table. Have you heard of this book?
I've heard of the concept.
Maxwell Waltz, written by Maxwell Waltz in 1960s. He was a plastic surgeon and he did a lot of plastic surgery on people. They got beautiful faces. Still people didn't believe. And it came because of, he's talking about subconscious mind. Everything is filtered through our subconscious mind. Some women got a beautiful face, but she doesn't believe that she has worth. She doesn't believe she has confidence. So
Right.
Personality is fine, but your self-image is not fine. So what do you think the correlation between beliefs and self-image?
Well, if your beliefs, if your core, I call them core beliefs, and most of your core beliefs are subconscious. And if your core beliefs lack the value and the power and the confidence that you can be anyone and do anything and that you are enough, if that isn't present based on some subconscious conditioning, perhaps the messages that were given to us, or perhaps the energies that we absorbed, then telling yourself that now that alone isn't going to be powerful enough to get you unstuck. There really has to be a sense of alignment between what your subconscious beliefs tell you with what your conscious beliefs tell you.
As a listener, I want to understand how and what can I do? Okay, now I understand there are subconscious beliefs, and my subconscious beliefs are not serving me and stopping me to move forward in life. Now, what can I do to get unstuck and do something about my subconscious beliefs?
Well, that's one of the reasons I created the Monarch Method, to help people, to give them a specific set of practices and philosophies and exercises to dive into that subconscious. Tapping into our subconscious material by ourselves can be very challenging. Do some of our subconscious core beliefs change on their own? Sometimes they do. More often, they do not change by themselves. So this is where support and information really helps people. There is information out there on these. You mentioned Dr. Dispenza, Dr. Lipton. They are great resources for understanding these concepts. Beyond the understanding of the concepts, specific steps are required. So it's really about garnering the support and guidance, whether it's books or professionals, to get yourself there. And frankly, once you have the support in peeling back those layers like an onion and getting to the core, it doesn't take that long. It's not necessarily traumatic. As a matter of fact, I've been known to drill down to people's subconscious core beliefs in half an hour or less with this method that I use. because it's not necessarily about raking through your past. It's really tapping into what is the thought, feeling, or behavior that no longer serves you. And let's explore for a minute and find out what the belief is that's driving that. So even though it sounds complicated and it can feel a bit overwhelming, the process is much simpler than you would realize.
It is simpler. So you're talking about the Monarch Method. So if we study your book, if we study those practices in the Monarch Method, we can get to our subconscious level to some extent. And then you're saying we get to have some support to really dig deep into our subconscious beliefs.
Yes, it's difficult to get to your own subconscious material, especially the first time by yourself. As a matter of fact, when I first published my book, I was selling it independently. And what I was hearing back from people was that I don't think I can do this myself because I'm so used to the patterns I'm in. It's hard for me to dig beneath that. So what I found is that the first time around when you're tapping into subconscious material and learning the process for how to do that, it's much easier to do with support and guidance, coaching, counseling, whatever that looks like for people. So, and then thereafter, it can be easier moving forward.
I would like to ask you, so how does this support look like? What is the form? Is it a mental health counselor, a coach, transformational coach, or a friend? So what does that support system look like?
It's not necessarily about the title because these days there are so many different types of practitioners out there. It's really about knowing what the philosophies and the beliefs and the practices of that particular practitioner are. So they can be a coach, they can be a counselor. Dr. Joe Dispenza, his education is as a chiropractor. He just happened to branch out into this amazing field of study. So it really is about the specific beliefs of the practitioner, not necessarily a title. And that requires some research. I know that I don't really know many people in my field, aside from myself, who practice this with individuals on a regular basis, but that doesn't mean they're not out there. It's just a rarer approach to mental and emotional well-being.
And coming back to the practices, could you share some of the basic practices that our listeners can start on their own before they seek support system?
Sure. So one of the things that is really important is to be conscious and present. And you'd be surprised how many of us are not conscious or present. It's just not part of how we're raised in this culture and many others. We're so focused on the future and or the past that being present is a skill that requires some development. So one of the practices I ask people to do is, as they go about their day, observe what they're thinking, feeling, and doing. And in the beginning, it's challenging because all of a sudden we get focused on something that happened or something that we're going to do, and we shift out of being present. So that's one of the first practices I get my clients into using, is being present for as much of the time as possible. Because until you're present, you're not aware of what's happening. And it's really hard to change things you're unaware of.
And when we are present, we can be an active listener.
Yes, and you can be an active observer of how you're feeling and what you're thinking and how those thoughts and feelings inform your choices and your actions. And when you're present, it's as if we're creating little gaps or spaces in time between our thought and our response. So typically when we're not present, people react. And then afterwards you think, wow, why did I say that? Or why did I do that? And I call those reactions. It's like automatic process that takes place. When you respond, you're much more thoughtful about what's coming and what your choices are. So being present really helps us to shift from reacting to responding. And when we respond, we've created those gaps in time, those spaces in our consciousness between the thought, the feeling, and the behavior, so that we can make better choices for ourselves.
And how does meditation come into this picture?
Meditation, there are so many different forms of meditation, and I just want to say that meditation has to be personalized for each person. It took me years to learn how to meditate because I was doing what other people and books told me to do, rather than really trying to discover what does that peaceful place inside look like for me. And eventually I found my own way to meditate. And guided meditations are great too. You know, if you find the right person with the right voice and the right words, then that really helps you. So what meditation does is it makes us present. And that is a great way to start, especially if you're going to meditate in the morning, to start your day with being very present and aware of your energy field and your thoughts and your feelings and your body and what's going on.
And I think meditation is becoming a common word these days, and still a lot of people are not being consistent with that. And if we study Dr. Joe Dispenza, he's very big on meditation, and he says that meditation is nothing but to overcome ourselves. If I meditate, it means I'm overcoming myself. Right. I can go in the day, I can win the day when I can overcome myself. Because our beliefs are 95% old beliefs.
Mm-hmm. Right. So if I get this right from what you're saying, that he tells you is that you're stepping out of your physical experience in the world and into your non-physical. So from your brain to your intuition, from your body into your spirit or your essence. And it's much easier to be present and to sort of rise above the fray and the fears in the world and in yourself.
And I want to ask you something very personal over here. Since you do this work with individuals and groups, and you have been doing this work for over 30, 35 years, and we are talking about 95% of our beliefs have shaped in the past. Do you think in your life you have gone deeper? You don't have 95% beliefs from the past?
You know, I've come a long way, I guess you could say. And in my most recent book that's supposed to be published this month, the title is All Yours, I talk a little bit about my story. And honestly, Nishant, I think all of us have somewhat of a story of trauma to triumph or struggles to success. And I really believe that it's the struggle and the trauma that is an essential part of our pathway to discovering what we don't want and to realizing that there's more to ourselves and our lives than we previously understood. For me, as a child and a teen, I struggled a great deal with depression and not feeling as if I was enough, very shy. And that culminated in a suicide attempt at 19 years old. And thankfully it didn't work because we're here chatting today. But, you know, in hindsight, I didn't want to die. I just wanted my heartache to go away. And I didn't know how to do that. And I continued to struggle through my 20s. And it wasn't until my 30s, my mid-30s, that I happened to find a counselor who focused on many of the things that you and I have discussed today, not necessarily the cognitive and psychological parts of our struggles and who we are, but much more on the energy and the personal power and intuition. So she taught me a lot of those concepts, and that was really the turning point for me in my life, to go from feeling really stuck in my own struggles and really focused on the fears of what if I don't succeed? What if I'm not loved? What if I'm not enough? What if I can't? We had so much of that going on inside. And I was able to shift out of that and it's hard to unknow, right? So once you make a significant changes just like that, it's not likely to go too far backwards. Not that I haven't struggled since then, but I've never lost that sense of knowing that I have that power within me to overcome and to move forward and continue to shift my outdated core beliefs to support me and create new beliefs moving forward.
I love what you mentioned, that discovering what you don't want. When you want something so bad, in that process of wanting, we discover what we don't want, and it is awareness.
Mm.
When we remove the obstacles to happiness, for instance, we achieve happiness. When we remove the obstacles to love, we attain love. And I had this point in my notes. I wanted to ask you that you mentioned that at age 35, your life changed because you met your spiritual counselor / guide. So what practices, if you don't mind explaining some of the practices you had to go through at that age to really, move forward in life and not looking back?
Well, a lot of those practices actually ended up becoming part of my philosophies and my methods today. And it really started with, that was a long time ago. We're talking 20 years ago, Nishant. So I have to recollect exactly what happened. What I can remember is thinking at the time, before I met her, is that the only way to create change was to figure it out. So using my brain was a very outside-in process, which is what we're taught, is that if we have the right job, the right partner, if we look right, if we make enough money, and all those things. So if we create this life that meets everybody else's expectations, then we will feel good inside. And I call that outside in. And I would try and try and try. And sometimes for a period of time I'd feel better, but it never lasted. And I always ended up hitting a rock bottom or feeling as poorly as I did previously. And so I had gone through that cycle for my teens to my 20s and into my early 30s. And when I met this counselor, she began to teach me about intuition and about our non-physical capacities, our power and our intention and energy. And when I started to educate myself about some of those things, in addition to her guidance, I couldn't get enough reading material. And because we already have that knowing within us, it really opened a window into things that were already within me, skills and capacities that I already have, but were so shrouded by my fears and my efforts at staying in my brain that I didn't realize they were in there. And that was sort of the beginning of my life, really. It was the beginning of my transformation into a whole new world of knowing who I was, and then being able to practice and write and teach all of these philosophies.
As a listener to this podcast, if I feel I am going through the same situation, I'm living in fear, I don't know where to go, what to do, what advice would you give to somebody who is stuck?
My first piece of advice would be to have faith that you are enough, that you are so much more powerful than you realize, and you are not broken, that you have what it takes to solve problems and achieve your goals. And then the second piece would be to go about looking for the support, looking for the books, looking for the resources out in the world to help you step onto that path of faith and love and enoughness, so that you can begin to live the life that you dream, because it's possible for everybody.
Could you recommend some of the books that have inspired you in your life?
Some of the books that have inspired me. Okay. You're tapping into my memory, Nishant, which sometimes in my late 50s, I would say that, one of the first books that I read that in the very beginning that taught me about some of this was Seat of the Soul by Gary Zukov. And for me, that was a very telling book about all of these new concepts, this world of metaphysics. But he isn't the only author. So I wouldn't want to, take people down a path saying you have to have a specific book. There are so many wonderful authors out there. And I just started going to the bookstore, or these days the section of Amazon, and looked up themes like metaphysics or spirituality or leadership or self-help. And there are so many more resources out there today than there used to be that talk about our personal power. And not only those philosophies, but the science and the research that you and I have talked about, that myself as well as other experts and researchers are looking into. So now there's science to support these philosophies, which is just wonderful.
And when we start all this work, it seems overwhelming. It is a lot of work. When we are starting, it just, telling ourselves that it is possible and taking one step at a time. It can be overwhelming when we start. I was overwhelmed when I started this journey because we just want to accomplish so many things in less time. We are impatient, and it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And every book, I think there is no life-changing book. There is no one book that can change your life. Right. Every book will give you new insights, new inspiration, new wisdom.
I think that's true. There are so many resources out there that can guide us on this pathway. The key for me then and now is having the people in my life to guide me along, whether it's a mentor or a counselor or a guide, or whatever form that comes in. Beyond your friends and your loved ones, find a person or a few people that can specifically guide you along the way. And what I tell people when they say, how do I find the right match for me as far as counselors or coaches or guides, I tell people, interview the people that you're going to pay, that you're going to hire to provide you with that service. Interview them and
what
sure
questions should they ask?
For me, it's not so much specific questions, but as I ask them, what's their background? What's their philosophy? What's their approach? What is their belief on the client-counselor relationship or client-coach relationship? So the questions are very basic. What was important for me is the answers, and getting a sense that what they had to say resonated with me and matched what I intuitively felt would be a good path for me moving forward. So again, it's really paying attention to what your gut is telling you about the match and about the opportunities with these different support people you bring into your life.
Why not friends and loved ones?
We all need friends and loved ones, for sure. I don't think that, in my experience, they don't necessarily have the objectivity to take us to places that someone who can be more subjective can take you. My guides and counselors have offered me a lot of tough love that I don't think my loved ones would have. And they weren't in it for personal, it wasn't a personal relationship, so it was easier for them to help me navigate the path than it would have been for someone that I, a family member or a friend that I have in my life on a regular basis.
We have been talking about psychology, beliefs, transformation. I want to talk about mindfulness. How do you think mindfulness fit into all this transformation now? mindfulness is becoming a buzzword these days.
It is becoming a buzzword these days. And I've never really, that's an area that I haven't necessarily dove into. And I really couldn't even tell you why. As a matter of fact, I was on, reading the news on Google this morning, and there was an article, and I didn't even open the article, but the article title said, "Is mindfulness good for you? ? There are some experts that say it may not be." So, I think there's a balance to everything. Yes, we need to be mindful, but being in our minds and in our brains all of the time isn't any better than being in our spirits or in our energy all of the time. It's really important to balance who we are. We are whole beings, mind, body, emotion, spirit. So if you think about it, because all of those aspects are integrated and affect one another, whether we realize it or not, we're going to need solutions that are also holistic in nature. So it's a great idea to have a couple different practitioners or practices in your life at once. Even if you feel like what you're dealing with, for example, is a physical issue, there's nothing wrong with having a coach or an energy medicine practitioner to help balance the reharmonizing of who you are as a holistic being.
This is very powerful. You just mentioned that there is no one such thing that can change our life. It's a set of different practices, and that can come from mindfulness, psychology, belief changing. It's like physical, emotional, mental, spiritual practices. If we just focus on one area, such as physical practice, if we don't focus on emotional, mental well-being, our spiritual well-being, we are out of balance. We are out of harmony.
Right. That's exactly right, Nishant. Exactly right. That the process must be a holistic process because we're holistic beings.
And we have become known as the soul whisperer. Why is that? Soul whisperer.
Someone called me that years ago, and it was kind of fun. It stuck for sure. And it's basically because I reconnect people to their soul's purpose and passion. And I do that by tapping into subconscious stuff. I do that by helping people understand who they are metaphysically and the importance of the concepts we've talked about, energy and intuition and intention. And so the name kind of stuck. I kind of like it.
Have you gotten into the work of Deepak Chopra? He's into metaphysics.
Yes, I read early on. I devoured many of his books as well. Yes.
He can be very deep.
Yes, he can be very deep. And again, it's one of those things where his practices are very focused on energy and mindfulness and metaphysics. And it's important to balance those things with studies that have to do with our bodies and science and genetics and those things.
Can
it's
you
really about balancing our
explain
practices.
a little bit on metaphysics in a layman language?
So metaphysics, if you separate the word, so physics or physical would be our material, tangible world, and meta is beyond or bigger than. So metaphysics is looking at what is beyond what our five physical senses tell us. So you have your five senses, which are sight, sound, taste, smell, and touch. And those are very much about our physical experience. Metaphysics says there's more to life than that. So intuition, knowing, intention. Some of the things that are a bit more out there are like ESP, extrasensory perception, and things like that. So metaphysics just expands what we know to be true physically.
Can we rely on our intuition all the time for major decision-making process or something like that?
I believe that the intuition is very important to major decision-making. Is it the only capacity that we use? Absolutely not. We have to understand our physical world and what's going on around us. However, I believe that the intuition is much more intelligent than our brains in many cases, and that combining our mental intelligence with our intuitive intelligence is the perfect pairing for making major decisions.
Yes, there is a distinction here and some of the research suggests that intuition is coming from our past experiences. So knowing that if that intuition is really our intuition or if it is driven from our past experiences, or from our past negative traumatic experiences.
So I believe the intuition is actually not connected to the past. I believe our intuition tells us, creates messages and imagery and understanding that are based on the present and the future. So moving forward, our intuition is very much connected to our soul essence, to our spirits, and to the greater universal soul existence. So that it doesn't necessarily, it's not a derivative of our human experiences in the past. It really is much more focused on the larger essence of who we are moving forward.
Exactly. And before we conclude this conversation, I would like to ask you some of the questions that I'm very intrigued about. So you, in your 20s, you mentioned that you had unresolved anger. How did you overcome and how did you resolve your anger?
So my anger was really an extension of my fear of just not, at my core, I didn't believe that I was enough. I didn't believe that I had value or self-worth. And that's a really scary, vulnerable place to be all the time. Anger feels much safer. Anger and aggression almost feel like armor. So it's not unusual for people's fear and vulnerability to manifest or show up as anger and aggression, because we have this illusion that will, and it doesn't really. We still feel vulnerable and we still feel hurt. So shifting away of my anger really coincided with shifting out of my fear. And as I mentioned previously, that took place in my mid-30s when I began to discover my inner power, which is very much connected to faith and love and what's possible. And I started to live there as opposed to living in the control and the fear and the anger. So it took a couple years to make that complete shift. But as soon as I started the work, I could see possibility and change almost immediately.
And confronting the fear, when we confront the fear, then we can work on resolving our anger. Anger is just another negative emotion which is arising from something unresolved, some beliefs, unresolved beliefs or behavior or something in the past, and that arises anger.
Right. So anger is a derivative of the fear, and that's in many cases how fear shows up. So, for instance, right now what's happening in our world is a perfect example. You see a lot of people behaving in ways that, we want to shake our heads and say, what do people think? Well, that's how their fear is showing up as anger. And that's when we get stuck in not being present and not being aware of our choices and our strength and our faith. So when you shift from fear to faith and from anger to peace, you don't have to focus on the fear to get it out of the way. As a matter of fact, what you focus on brings more to you. So it's more about, I know what my fear is. My fear is I'm not going to be successful. I'm not going to be loved. Or for some people it is I am going to be successful. And that's a whole separate set of issues. But so we're pretty clear on what our fears are. And at that moment, it's not about diving into them further because we don't need to figure out where they came from necessarily. It's about saying, what's the opposite of that fear? What do I desire? And putting your energy and your focus in that direction is what is likely to bring more of that to you.
Are you saying embracing our fear is fine? We can embrace our fears and then we do something with that?
Yes, and I think acknowledge is a better word. When people think of embracing their fears, they think, well, I don't want to love or hug something that I don't like. And it's more of an acceptance or an acknowledgement that we're not perfect, that we do struggle, that we have fears, and saying, yeah, that exists. That's part of me. And that doesn't have to be what I focus on. And it certainly isn't going to be what's going to get me moving forward. It's kind of like if you think about driving a car and you're driving away from something that is scary or something you didn't like. You're not looking backwards as you're driving the car, I hope. You're looking forward to where you want to go. The fear and what you left behind is in the back seat. And we know it exists and we know it's part of our experience, but it's not the focus for moving forward in the direction you go.
And one of the things that I remind myself over and over these days is observe yourself, watch yourself the way you watch and observe others.
Mm-hmm.
So come out of your body. Imagine it's like an imagination. When you are in fearful mode or anger state, just observe yourself and don't attach yourself, don't identify yourself with those emotions, because it's a difference between I versus me. It's the me, quote unquote me, who is affected. I is wholehearted. I is soulful, which never gets affected. So observing yourself, which is another, we can say conscious practice, mindful present, mindful practice. We can call it whatever we want to call, but observing ourselves.
That's very important. And that's a great way to start. And remember that circumstances are simply circumstances. We get to choose every emotion we attach to every circumstance. So when you are observing yourself, when you're present, when you're conscious, that is what we spoke of earlier, that creates that gap in time, that creates that space to decide what emotion do I want to attach to this set of circumstances. And that really broadens the possibilities for choosing the thoughts, feelings, and behaviors moving forward.
And in all this conversation, do you feel that journaling can do some good in our life? Yes,
writing is very important. When we write, it taps into a completely different part of our brains than when we think.
And so writing on paper or on computer?
Both, but I would say writing on paper. So it's the manual process of your hands connected to your brain and writing or drawing or creating that taps into a different part of your brain than when you're simply thinking or imagining. And it allows you to process a concept much differently than if you're thinking of it.
So what was your book writing process? Did you draft the outline on the computer or you just longhand process?
Longhand for me. That's usually how I start. When I have a thought, an inspired thought or a concept comes to me, and I believe that I access all of the wisdom and information from a greater source. But when it drops in or downloads and I become conscious of it, I grab whatever piece of paper, a napkin or a notebook or whatever's available, and I jot it down. And then if I have a specific goal or book in mind, I'll do that for a number of months. And then at the end, I put all of my notes together and sort of reorganize them on the computer.
Writing is a very creative process, and we don't have to be writers to write. We can just write whatever comes to mind. And that's another observation technique.
Yes, exactly.
Well, Dr. Kimble, it's been an amazing, lovely conversation. And where can our listeners find you online?
At my website, drkimblegreene.com, or the Monarch Method is the best way to get a hold of me. And I have a free quiz on my website that's called the Core Instincts Quiz. And it only takes about 10 minutes. And it's a good place to start for people to identify which of the core instincts they use the most versus which they use the least. It's fun to discover about the different ways we function and operate.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Kimble. It was amazing.
Thank you, Nishant. I really enjoyed the conversation and the opportunity to talk about these cool concepts.
Thank you for listening to this podcast episode today. I hope you learned from this episode that you can apply in your life. If you did enjoy this, please subscribe to the podcast, The Nishant Garg Show, on Apple Podcast. You can also subscribe to the show through my website, https://nishantgarg.me, NISHANTGARG.me. You can also share this podcast with your family and friends or whoever want to feel fulfilled. And thank you so much again.